A millionaire offered his entire fortune to anyone who could translate a single sentence. 27 linguists tried and failed, but when a black woman, humiliated by him in front of everyone, opened her mouth to answer, silence took over the room. What she said wasn't just the translation, it was a revelation that destroyed the billionaire's ego and exposed a secret he had kept for decades. The fortune was at stake, but what was truly about to be revealed was far greater. Keisha had always known that life wouldn't offer her any favors. From the moment she could form memory, she understood that survival meant working twice as hard for half the recognition. She lost her mother to illness when she was barely 16 years old, leaving her to become the primary caretaker for her 3 younger cousins who had nowhere else to go. To keep them fed, clothed, and in school, Keisha took whatever work came her way. She cleaned office buildings in downtown Atlanta until dawn broke through the windows, scrubbed floors in gated communities where security guards watched her every move, and served at exclusive private events where she was expected to be present but invisible. The dream of attending college, of building something more for herself, seemed to slip further into the distance with each passing year. Yet despite the weight of her circumstances, despite the countless small indignities she endured daily, Keisha never surrendered the belief that she deserved respect and dignity, even when the world around her seemed designed to convince her otherwise. She carried herself with a quiet pride that no amount of hardship could completely extinguish, a stubborn flame that refused to be blown out no matter how harsh the winds became. That determination is what brought her to the Henderson estate in Buckhead, one of Atlanta's most prestigious neighborhoods. Marcus Henderson was a name that opened doors and silenced rooms throughout Georgia and beyond. A real estate and investment titan whose net worth placed him comfortably among the wealthiest people in the American South, Marcus had built his fortune through a combination of shrewd business decisions, ruthless negotiations, and an unshakable confidence in his own superiority. He was known throughout Atlanta's elite circles for his expensive tastes, his collection of vintage cars, and his habit of treating anyone he considered beneath his station as essentially furniture with a pulse. His employees were expected to be efficient, silent, and grateful for the privilege of working in his presence. To Marcus Henderson, Keisha was nothing more than the cleaning woman who appeared when messes needed handling and vanished when her tasks were complete. She was background noise, a necessary function that required no acknowledgement beyond the occasional barked instruction. What Marcus didn't know, what he couldn't have imagined even if he'd bothered to consider her as a complete human being, was that Keisha possessed something that would soon shatter his carefully constructed sense of superiority into 1,000 irreparable pieces. For nearly 9 years, ever since she'd taken responsibility for her cousins, Keisha had dedicated every scrap of free time she could steal to educating herself. While her cousins slept, she studied. During bus rides between jobs, she studied. In the brief moments between tasks at work, she studied. She collected books from everywhere. Library sales where hardcovers went for $1, donation boxes outside bookstores, even trash bags left on curbs in wealthy neighborhoods where families discarded what they no longer wanted. She taught herself with a fierce determination born from understanding that knowledge was the only ladder that might lift her from her circumstances. French was her first conquest, then Italian, followed by Arabic, but it was Russian that had captured her imagination completely, thoroughly, obsessively. The Cyrillic alphabet, the complex grammar, the way the language could be both harsh and beautiful in the same sentence, it all fascinated her in ways she struggled to articulate even to herself. She'd spent thousands of hours with Russian literature, language learning apps, online videos, and conversation practice groups, pushing herself to achieve fluency that would rival native speakers. On that particular October evening, Marcus was hosting what he called his annual autumn gala, an event that had become legendary among Atlanta's social elite. It was the kind of gathering where fortunes were discussed casually over cocktails, where political alliances were formed beside the pool, where everyone who mattered in Georgia business and society fought for an invitation. Tech executives mingled with old money families, entertainment industry moguls exchanged cards with real estate developers, and local politicians worked the room with practiced smiles. Keisha had been working since early that morning, ensuring every surface gleamed, every flower arrangement sat perfectly positioned, every detail met Marcus's exacting and often impossible standards. She moved through the elegant rooms with practiced invisibility, straightening what was already straight, polishing what was already polished, making herself as unobtrusive as possible among the designer dresses and bespoke suits. She was just another piece of the carefully orchestrated perfection Marcus demanded, present but unworthy of notice, functional but unimportant. As she carefully adjusted a silver tray of champagne glasses near the main salon, she heard Marcus's distinctive laugh cutting through the ambient conversation. He was moving through the crowd with his usual entourage of admirers and associates, commanding attention simply by existing, wearing that expression she'd come to recognize over her months working in his home. That particular combination of charm and contempt, warmth directed at his equals and cold dismissal for everyone else. The face of a man who believed the world was divided into people who mattered and people who served. His eyes swept across the room with casual ownership, taking inventory of his possessions, his guests, his domain. And then they landed on Keisha with the sudden focus of a predator noticing prey. "Keisha," he called out, his voice carrying across the space with deliberate projection, ensuring nearby guests would hear whatever was about to happen. "Come over here. I want to ask you something." She felt her pulse quicken, that familiar mixture of apprehension and resignation that came whenever Marcus singled her out for attention. Nothing good ever followed when he decided to notice her, but she set down the napkin she'd been folding, smoothed her uniform, and walked toward him with measured steps, keeping her expression neutral and professional. The conversations around them began to fade as guests sensed entertainment approaching. People turned subtly, pretending to continue their own discussions while watching from the corners of their eyes. Marcus waited until she stood directly before him, until he had maximized the audience for whatever performance he was about to deliver, before speaking again. Then, without warning, he switched into flawless Russian, his pronunciation perfect, his tone dripping with theatrical mockery that needed no translation to communicate its intent. "Ty umayish uberat doma, no ty umayish govorit na civilizovanim yazik, ili ty panamish tolko kakabsluzavat takik liudi, kak ya." You know how to clean houses, but do you know how to speak a civilized language? Or do you only understand how to serve people like me? The reaction was immediate and exactly what Marcus had anticipated. Laughter rippled through the nearby guests, some chuckling openly at the audacity of the moment, others hiding smiles behind their hands, a few looking vaguely uncomfortable but unwilling to challenge their host's behavior. Marcus stood there with satisfied amusement playing across his features, clearly delighted with himself, confident that he'd just delivered a harmless but memorable joke at the expense of someone who couldn't possibly respond. He'd spoken in Russian specifically because he was certain none of his staff would understand, allowing him to be as insulting as he wanted without consequence. It was the perfect setup for a story he could tell later, about how he'd tested the help in a foreign language just for the entertainment value. "Before we continue with what happens next, I need you to do something for me. If this story is making your blood boil, if you're feeling that anger rising up because you know exactly what it's like to be underestimated or disrespected, I want you to hit that subscribe button right now. But more than that, drop a comment and tell me this: what would you say to Marcus Henderson if you were standing in Keisha's position at this exact moment? Give me your best response, in any language you want. Let's fill this comment section with the words that people like Keisha deserve to say, but are often afraid to. Your voice matters here, and I want to hear it. Let's show the algorithm that stories about dignity and respect deserve to be heard. The laughter began to trail off as guests expected Keisha to do what countless others in her position had done before: lower her eyes, maybe mumble an apology for not understanding, retreat back into invisibility where she belonged according to the unspoken rules of their world. Marcus was already starting to turn back toward his circle of associates, ready to bask in their approval and move on to the next amusement. The moment was supposed to be over, filed away as another story about keeping the help in their place, another reminder of the natural order of things. But then something happened that Marcus Henderson, in all his arrogance and certainty, could never have predicted or prepared for. Keisha lifted her head slowly, deliberately. Her hands, which had been trembling slightly at her sides, became perfectly still. She squared her shoulders and looked directly into Marcus's eyes with an intensity that made several guests nearby actually take a step back. When she spoke, her voice was clear and strong, carrying across the room with perfect Russian pronunciation, every syllable precisely formed, every tone exactly right. "Господин Henderson, vi skidi cho denji deat vam pravo sudat osanosti drugik liudi. No sami bedni chelovik vi toy komnate, vozmazno, ito vi, потому cho u vasnet uvishenia. Bogatsto, kotoroi tribuet drugik, ni yevlie bogats vam vavs. Ito prosto pozolota na pustoti." "Mr. Henderson, You believe that money gives you the right to judge the worth of other people. But the poorest person in this room is possibly you, because you have no respect. Wealth that requires humiliating others is not wealth at all. It is just gold paint on emptiness. The effect was catastrophic and immediate. The entire room seemed to stop breathing. Conversations died mid-word. Glasses froze halfway to lips. Every head swiveled toward Keisha, and the expressions that appeared on those faces formed a spectrum from pure shock to disbelief to something that looked almost like reverence. Marcus's face went through a remarkable transformation, from amused superiority to confusion to comprehension to a pallor that made him look almost ill under the warm glow of the chandeliers. His mouth opened and closed several times without producing sound, like a fish suddenly pulled from water. The confident posture he'd maintained moments before collapsed into something smaller, diminished. Ty Goverish po-Ruski, he finally managed to stammer, still in Russian, his voice barely audible, stripped of all its earlier confidence and mockery. You speak Russian? Da, господин, Keisha replied, her voice steady and controlled, before switching seamlessly into English that rang clear across the silent room. Yes, sir, and I also speak French, Italian, and Arabic fluently. I taught myself over 9 years using books that people in neighborhoods like this throw away without a second thought. Books you probably have collecting dust in your library that you've never even opened. I've studied while working 3 jobs to support my family, while you've spent your evenings at parties like this one. I learned these languages because education is the one thing that circumstances can't take from me, because knowledge is power that doesn't require permission or inheritance. And unlike some people in this room, I don't need to humiliate others to feel intelligent or important. The silence that followed was profound and heavy, the kind of silence that feels like it's pressing down on everyone in the space. Then, from somewhere near the French doors leading to the terrace, an elderly woman began to clap. Her hands came together slowly at first, deliberately, then faster and louder. Within seconds, others joined her. The applause spread through the gathering like a wave, building in volume and intensity until it seemed to shake the crystal in the chandeliers. Several guests were openly smiling now, nodding in approval, and more than a few raised their glasses toward Keisha in a silent salute of respect. The room had shifted in an instant, and everyone present could feel it. The power dynamic that Marcus had assumed was permanent and unchangeable had just been shattered in front of dozens of witnesses. A prominent civil rights attorney, someone whose name Keisha recognized from news articles and television appearances, pushed her way through the crowd with determination written across her face. "Excuse me, miss, I don't believe we've been formally introduced, but what you just did was nothing short of extraordinary. The courage it takes to stand up for your dignity when the entire world is telling you to stay silent. That's something I don't see nearly often enough. I absolutely must speak with you before this evening ends. I have some opportunities that I think would interest you greatly." Marcus, feeling the weight of every judgmental eye in the room boring into him, tried desperately to salvage something from the wreckage of the moment. He forced out a laugh that sounded hollow and desperate, nothing like his earlier confident amusement. It was just to test everyone. A joke. I wanted to see if she'd react. No harm meant. Just a bit of fun among friends. But even as he spoke the words, he could see that nobody was buying his explanation. The damage was done, irreparable and complete. They'd all seen what had really happened, and no amount of backtracking would erase it. Keisha held his gaze for a long, uncomfortable moment before responding, and when she finally spoke, her words cut through his excuses like a blade through paper. "Jokes reveal our true character, Mr. Henderson. They show what we really think when we believe nobody will challenge us or hold us accountable. You have more money than I could earn in 50 lifetimes of work. Your car collection is probably worth more than most people's houses. But standing here in this moment, I have something you don't. Something that all your wealth can't buy: dignity that doesn't require diminishing others to exist. Self-respect that doesn't depend on making other people feel small. That's worth more than every dollar in your bank account." The words landed like physical blows. Marcus couldn't maintain eye contact. He looked away, looked down, looked anywhere except at Keisha or the faces of his guests. Several people near him actually took steps back, as if his humiliation might be contagious, as if association with him in this moment might taint them by proximity. The evening never recovered its earlier momentum or energy. Conversations eventually resumed, but they were muted, subdued, and carried an undercurrent of discomfort that no amount of expensive champagne could wash away. More than once, Keisha caught guests looking in her direction with expressions of admiration and respect. Marcus retreated to a corner of his own home, surrounded by a few loyal associates. But even they maintained a certain distance now, their interactions with him marked by a new awkwardness that hadn't existed before. The king had been dethroned in his own castle, and everyone had witnessed it. In the days and weeks that followed, the story spread through Atlanta and beyond with the speed and intensity of wildfire in dry grass. Cleaning woman destroys millionaire in Russian at elite party became a headline that appeared across local news sites, then regional platforms, then national media outlets. Videos recorded discreetly by guests on their phones began circulating on social media, accumulating millions of views, thousands of comments, and endless shares. Keisha's name suddenly appeared everywhere. Morning talk shows wanted interviews. Local news stations camped outside her apartment building. Her phone, which had rarely rung with anything except bill collectors and shift confirmation, suddenly couldn't stop buzzing with notification. Emory University reached out personally to offer her a full scholarship to any program she wanted to pursue. Translation agencies and international companies contacted her with job offers that paid more in a month than she currently made in a year. A major publisher expressed interest in her story, suggesting a book deal. Speaking engagement requests flooded in from community organizations, schools, and corporate diversity programs. The TED organization sent a formal invitation for her to deliver a talk. Her entire life trajectory changed in a matter of days. Marcus Henderson, for his part, discovered that his reputation had sustained damage that would take years to repair, if it could be repaired at all. Business partners began expressing concerns about his judgment and character. Some contracts were quietly put on hold pending further review. His social calendar, once overflowing with invitations to exclusive events, suddenly looked sparse and sad. Several charities returned his donations and removed his name from their boards of directors. His country club membership came under review. The local business journal ran a scathing editorial about leadership and respect in Atlanta's business community that didn't mention him by name, but didn't need to. Everyone knew who they were talking about. And in the privacy of his thoughts, during the sleepless nights that followed, Marcus was forced to confront something he'd spent his entire privileged life avoiding. The uncomfortable truth that treating people as inferior because of their circumstances wasn't a demonstration of superiority, but rather a revelation of profound insecurity and moral bankruptcy. Keisha continued working at the Henderson estate for 3 more weeks, not because she needed the income anymore, but because she wanted to leave on her own terms, with her head held high and her dignity intact. When she finally submitted her resignation letter, she did so in person, handing Marcus an envelope with a brief note inside. The note was written in Russian, and it said simply, Nastoящее богатство определяется не тем, что мы имеем, а тем, как мы относимся к этому, что не может дать нам ничего взамен. Я прощаю вас, но я никогда не забуду. True wealth is not determined by what we possess, but by how we treat those who can give us nothing in return. I forgive you, but I will never forget. 6 months later, when Keisha delivered her first major public address at the historic Ebenezer Baptist Church in downtown Atlanta, the sanctuary was filled beyond capacity. People stood in the aisles, sat on the floor, crowded into doorways just to hear her speak. Young students who saw themselves in her story. Working parents juggling multiple jobs who understood her struggle. Elderly community members who'd fought their own battles against disrespect and discrimination. Immigrants who knew what it meant to be underestimated because of language or accent. They'd all come to hear the woman who'd stood up when standing up seemed impossible. And when Keisha reached the conclusion of her presentation, she shared the lesson that had carried her through not just that confrontation with Marcus Henderson, but through every difficult moment of her life leading up to it. Never underestimate the quiet strength of someone who's been underestimated their entire life. Never dismiss the intelligence of someone who's been treated as ignorant. Never overlook the dignity of someone who's been made to feel invisible. Because when that person finally speaks, when they finally claim the space they've always deserved, the world has no choice but to stop and listen. Your voice matters. Your worth is not determined by your bank account or your job title or the neighborhood you live in. You are valuable simply because you exist, because you're human, because you deserve respect. And nobody, regardless of their wealth or power or social status, has the right to make you feel otherwise. Stand tall, speak up, and never, ever let anyone convince you that you're less than you are. The standing ovation that erupted lasted for more than 7 minutes. People were crying openly, hugging strangers, shouting affirmations and encouragement. And as Keisha looked out at that sea of fate, seeing her own struggles and triumphs reflected in their eyes, seeing the hope she'd sparked in people who'd spent their lives feeling powerless, she understood something profound. The confrontation in Marcus Henderson's mansion hadn't been just about one black woman standing up to one arrogant wealthy man. It had been about every person who'd ever been dismissed because of their race, their economic status, their education level, or their occupation. It had been about dignity reclaimed and respect demanded. It had been about the fundamental, unshakable truth that every human being deserves to be treated with basic courtesy and consideration, regardless of whether they're serving you champagne or running a corporation. It had been about changing the conversation, about refusing to accept that some people matter more than others, about building a world where everyone's worth is recognized and honored. This is where I need you to understand that you're not just watching a video. You're part of a movement, part of a community that believes respect isn't negotiable and dignity isn't optional. If Keisha's courage resonated with you, if her words made something shift inside you, I need you to subscribe to this channel right now. But that's not enough. I want to hear your story. Down in the comments, tell us about a time when you stood up for yourself or witnessed someone else claim their worth when the world tried to deny it. Tell us what this video taught you or how it made you feel. Share the moment when you realized your voice mattered. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today to find their own courage. This comment section is a safe space, a community where every experience matters, where every perspective deserves to be heard. And if this message moved you, hit that share button. Send it to someone who needs to hear it. Post it on your social media. Let's make sure that people like Keisha, people who've been made to feel invisible and unimportant, know that they're seen, they're valued, and they're never alone. Together, we're not just consuming content. We're changing hearts and minds. We're building a world where respect is the default, not the exception. Let's do this together.